And for her, what happened to her husband and to her daughter and to their friends and their families, it tears you apart, right? It destroys you inside. But then it's at some point, and I can understand this, at some point you're going to get a little bit angry and feel like something wrong happened that shouldn't have happened. And then what do you do about it, right? There's no criminal activity associated with any of this. But two things happened, and I want to talk about both of them tonight. One, it came out that some sheriff's deputies may have taken some unauthorized photos at the scene and then shared them, and apparently were sharing them and talking to each other about them at a bar. And someone overheard it and called in. As a matter of fact, I want to read a quick statement from Vanessa Bryant's attorney, who wrote, "Our client, Vanessa Bryant, is absolutely devastated by the allegations that deputies from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and the Los Angeles County Fire Department publicly disseminated photos from the helicopter crash site. This is an unspeakable violation of human decency, respect, and of the privacy rights of the victims and their families." So you can understand how angry you would get there. Another thing has happened, and I've got a copy right here in my hand. This is the civil lawsuit that's been filed by Vanessa Bryant against the helicopter company. So let's try to unwrap this a little bit. Joining me tonight is civil trial attorney Callie Brice. Callie, great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start first with the sheriff's deputies and what happened there. And the statement from his counsel at the end, he even writes, "We ask anyone else who has information about the facts underlying these alleged grievous and shameful incidents, contact our office." Do you think there could be some sort of legal action brought for the taking of these unauthorized photos at the scene?
I think it's definitely possible. I think we have to see what the facts reveal in time. But on the face, it definitely looks like there could be some liability there, for sure.
And it looks like what the sheriff's department may have done is brought in those deputies, had them delete all of it, which is almost like deleting evidence in a certain sense, isn't it?
Absolutely.
But I understand why he did it, but that's kind of strange, isn't it?
It's a little strange. And you want to know, who took those photos and where those photos were disseminated, and whether or not someone sold the photos or the rights to the photos. I think there's just a lot we don't know at this time.
Yeah, and we have not heard any indication that they've shown up anywhere on the internet, because as soon as it shows up one place, it's there forever, and we hope for the families that that doesn't happen. Let's talk about this civil lawsuit. We can put up on the screen part of the suit that really stands out to me. Negligence, obviously. But here they're talking about the failure to equip the helicopter with safety equipment. They're talking about the heavy fog and the low clouds. From your perspective, when you're looking at a civil lawsuit like this, it's a tragic accident. Where's the line between a tragic accident and something where, hey, this shouldn't have happened and someone needs to pay for this, literally?
I think, unfortunately, we have a set of facts just based on what I've seen in the complaint that seem to indicate that there was gross negligence on the part of the helicopter company. And the complaint alleges that there was certain instrumentality that could have saved lives. That was not FAA certified. This company was not FAA certified with this type of equipment, which is instrument flight rules. Versus what's called visible flight rules.
Right. So when you've got all this fog and everything, you can fly, or whether at night, so you can fly without physically seeing where you're going necessarily.
Exactly. So when you have weather conditions such as cloudy, fog, etc., unless you have the instrumentality, you're not permitted to fly because you're not certified in what's called these instrument federal flight rules. Well, the pilot and the helicopter company were not certified to fly with those instruments.
Let me start right here, because this is the part that will surprise. Like Kobe Bryant, unlimited money. I mean, he's going to take every safety precaution, but he only knows what he knows. He's not a helicopter pilot per se. Are you, you do civil cases all the time. Are you surprised that a company at this level with a client like this would engage in behavior that, they could be held liable for, like just not doing the right thing when you've got, whether it's anyone flying in the sky? That's the part I don't understand.
I think Kobe, just like any consumer, relied on the experts, relied on the pilot, relied on the helicopter company to keep him and his family and his friends safe. I think that unless you were an expert or were familiar with FAA guidelines, I think that how would you know there was a difference between instrument flight rules and visible flight rules? You know, you probably assume that this company has taken those precautions, otherwise they wouldn't have okayed the flight. Part of the complaint goes into talking about how they should have had a protocol when the weather conditions were such, because they weren't permitted to fly using the type of instruments that would have saved lives that day. And I think that that's why we have the civil justice system, because who is going to hold corporations accountable for trying to cut the bottom line when lives are at stake? Yeah. I did a little bit of research on my own, and I mean, it's expensive to have this FAA certification that involves instrumentality. I read something like it was over $40,000 per helicopter to keep that certification up to date on a yearly annual basis. So if you think about, you have a fleet of helicopters, that can get kind of expensive. And you're in a place like Los Angeles when it's hardly ever cloudy, the weather is usually pretty good, right? You're probably trying to save a buck. And unfortunately, this is what resulted. I also noticed that back in May of 2015, the pilot had been cited by the FAA for, again, violating these visual flight instrument rules, because he was only permitted to fly visually. So he still flew into poor conditions, and he was cited by the FAA. And the company didn't do anything about it.
So, you know, when you're talking about civil law, you know, a lot of people get skeptical about civil law, right? Because, you're just after some money.
Right.
But that's the only way that we change behavior.
Absolutely.
I mean, if they're not committing a crime, crime deters people and changes behavior, hopefully, right?
Absolutely.
But that's what civil law does. And whether it's a car accident or whatever it is, you need to hold companies, corporations, businesses that we entrust ourselves with to be accountable. Do what you're supposed to do.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know,
even when you're Kobe Bryant, you know, with millions and millions and millions of dollars, you're still relying on someone else.
Absolutely. I think the civil justice system definitely stands as a checks and balances between corporations, greed, and the everyday consumer, including someone with as many resources as Kobe Bryant. And it's very clear that this company is going to have a very difficult time.
It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough,
with
especially
all of these different
if you get it in front of a
deaths.
jury as well. But the NTSB talked about the weather conditions at their press conference. Let's take a listen to that.
Is there any way to safely fly this helicopter in thick fog? I mean, I think there's a lot of variabilities there. And so we're focused on what the weather conditions were for this, on Sunday for this flight. And we have a weather expert on staff currently looking at the weather and decision making for flying in the weather that day.
So let me ask you this. How does the NTSB investigation relate to this lawsuit? Will they kind of work hand in hand?
Well, I think that a couple things stuck out to me about the timing of the filing of the lawsuit. In California, there's a 2-year statute of limitations from the date of injury to the date that you can file. This was filed on February 24th.
Fast.
Yes.
Very fast.
The same.
But 224 on purpose.
I think it was significant. It was also the same date as the memorial service. I believe that they will go hand in hand with their investigations and also in discovery, because you can't go into discovery, you can't get information that you need to really build your case without getting information and essential documents from the helicopter company, which they're not going to offer to you without filing suit.
Right, they're not voluntarily saying, hey, come in, take a look at our records, we'll show you everything. They're not going to do that.
Correct.
So tell me from your perspective what you think the impact will be on a very high-profile civil lawsuit like this. Like most civil lawsuits, one reason we don't cover them on court TV, civil trials, is they always settle. There's never a verdict, right?
Right.
I mean, I would say 999 times out of 1,000, the case settles before you get to a verdict. But it's that one that could be wow, right? A case like this, how do you see it going forward?
First of all, it seems to me that the motive of the family was probably more of making sure that this doesn't happen to other people's family members.
So you think that would force them to trial to make it even more public rather than, hey, we're doing a settlement, no one says anything, and we just quietly give money to the plaintiffs?
You know what? That's a really good point. I think that a lot of times you don't really know until you get into a lawsuit what the other side's willing to do, what they're not willing to do, whether or not they end up filing for bankruptcy. At this time, it's very preliminary, and they probably have a long way to go in discovery to find out details such as, who's the executor of the pilot's estate. There's just a lot they don't actually know without the formal discovery period. Whether or not it goes to a jury trial, in my opinion, it probably won't, and I'll tell you why. There's so much gross neglect in this lawsuit. I mean, there's 30 counts of allegations against the helicopter company and the pilot.
They're going to mitigate their damage and try to make it go away.
Well,
So do you think it's really Vanessa Bryant's going to make the call on whether or not she wants this thing to be very public? Because, number one, she doesn't want it to happen to anyone else, and she's a little bit angry.
yeah, I mean, I think that
Rightfully so.
I think she's rightfully so. I think that this accident could have been avoided, and that's terrible. And so I think that it's going to be absolutely up to the family how they want to pursue it. But I do think that having a lawsuit like this is really going to shed light on whether or not folks who own these helicopter companies continue without this instrumentality. We also see sometimes that laws change when different types of accidents like this happen. Maybe the
Regulations change, maybe they will have to
FAA
do this.
Exactly. Maybe they will be required to have this instrumentality in every helicopter from now on.
Yeah. Callie, Brice, great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know the civil law that well, but you helped us out a whole lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.